create an English language course for a specific workplace or profession, one of the challenges you face is figuring out what content you're going to teach your students. One of the starting points in this process is to look at the culture in which the students are going to use the language. I'm going to take you through a very simple framework that you can use to start to understand the complexity of the workplace culture in which your students need to function. Using this framework, you can analyze the workplace or professional culture of your students, and then you can start to pull out the content that you're going to put into your course. The framework we're going to use to analyze your workplace or professional culture is called the onion framework. You may have seen this before, it's not new. However, it's really useful because it is so simple. It allows us to dig into the complexity of the culture we're trying to figure out. We all know what an onion looks like. It has layers, and then we can peel those layers away to get to the core of the onion. The onion framework for culture works the same way. The outer parts of the onion are the pieces that we can see of a culture, and then as we peel away the layers, we get down to the core or the essential items of the culture. The outer layer of the onion is called the products layer. These are the things that we can see, we can touch, we can smell, we can read. All of these things that are very visible and very tangible constitute the outer layer of the onion framework. When we peel away the products layer of our onion, we come to the behaviors layer. These are the things that we see people doing in this culture. When we peel away the behaviors layer of our onion framework, we get to the very core or the essence of a culture. This is the culture's values, beliefs, and ideas. How can we use this framework to figure out what's going on in a workplace culture or a professional culture? It's a very simple process. First of all, we need to take a look at the products of that culture, then we take a look at the behaviors, and then we take a look at the ideas or the beliefs. So let's do each one of these in turn. I'm going to put you to work. Take a look at the workplace culture or professional culture for which you are designing a language course. Write down all of the products that you see. For example, do you see computers? Do you see desks? Do you see chairs? Do you see a whiteboard? What are the things that you see? Take a few minutes and write everything down. Hopefully you've got a fairly lengthy list of all of the workplace culture products that you see around you. We're going to take a look at this in a little bit more depth. There are different categories that we can put these products into so we can start to group them for teaching purposes. The first category of products is furniture and decor. These are things like tables, desks, chairs, what color are the walls, what color are the doors, are there windows? All of the things that contribute to the surroundings that the workplace culture or professional culture takes place in. The second category of products is another fairly obvious one. This is the category of tools and equipment. These are the things that we pick up and use as we're completing the work that takes place in this particular workplace or profession. For example, in an office workplace, some of the tools would include a computer, a printer, a scanner, and a cell phone. In a trades workplace, some of the tools might be a saw or a drill. And in a healthcare workplace, some of the tools might be bandages and medication. The next category is documents. Going back to our office workplace example, we might see reports or memos. In our trades workplace example, we might see safety documentation. And in our healthcare example, we might see patient records. The next category of products is one that's not quite as obvious. This is policies and procedures. These are the rules that are written down and understood by all of the people who participate in this workplace or professional culture. people follow these rules so that the organization or the culture runs smoothly. So policies and procedures could include what time you start work, when you can take lunches, how long your breaks are, when you can take vacations, and just other day-to-day things about how this organization functions. The next category of product is also not quite so obvious. This is legislation. Every workplace or professional culture is governed by some type of legislation from one of the layers of government. Most of this legislation is put into place in order to keep people safe. So you need to look at the workplace culture or the professional culture and see what the legislation is that people in that culture have to follow. The final category of product is symbols. Symbols are tangible things that represent deeper qualities or deeper values. Every organization has a set of symbols that it uses to represent those qualities or those values. So this might include things like the organization's colors, the organization's logo, or the organization's uniform. Why is it important to know the products associated with the workplace culture or professional culture for which you're designing a language course? Your students need to know the vocabulary for these products, and they also need to know the language associated with using these products. I'm going to put you to work again. What I'd like you to do is take your list of products from the workplace culture or professional culture for which you're designing a language course, and I'd like you to put them into these categories. This will help you get a handle on how to group things in order to teach your students the vocabulary for these products and the language that they need to know in order to use these products. Let's take a look at the next layer of the onion. We've peeled away the products and now we're going to look at the behaviors. I'm going to put you to work again. Think about the workplace culture or professional culture for which you're designing a language course and write down all of the things that people do in this culture. This list of behaviors that goes with the workplace culture or professional culture you're looking at for your course is important because your students need to know and be able to use the language that goes with these behaviors. Just as we categorized our products from our workplace or professional culture, we can also categorize the behaviors. The first category is behaviors associated with using the different products that are a part of the workplace or professional culture. For example, there are behaviors associated with using a computer, using a telephone, and using any of the different tools in the workplace. The next category is all about communication. How do people in that workplace or professional culture interact? For example, how do they socialize? How do they interact in a meeting? How does a manager manage and communicate with his or her subordinates? These are all things that fall into the communication category of behavior. The final category of behaviors is following protocol. What do we do and what do we say when we're following those rules and regulations and policies in the organization? I'm going to put you to work again. I'd like you to take your list of behaviors for the workplace or professional culture for which you're developing your course and put them into these 3 different categories. In this way, you'll have an idea, once again, of how to group these behaviors for teaching purposes. The final layer of our culture onion, once we strip away the products and then the behaviors, is the core values, ideas, and beliefs that drive the culture. I have another job for you. Once again, take a look at the workplace or professional culture for which you're building your course. List out all of the ideas and values and beliefs that drive that particular culture. found that job a little bit more difficult than the job of writing down the products and behaviors in the workplace or professional culture. The ideas, values, and beliefs are simply not as obvious as the other two layers of the culture onion. I'm going to take you through a list of values and ideas that you might find in a workplace or professional culture. As I do this, think about whether each of these values and ideas is applicable to the particular workplace or professional culture for which you are designing your course. Equality regardless of age, gender, or religion. Tolerance of differences. Hard work should be rewarded. Ability should be rewarded. Rules, regulations, and laws should be followed. Companies should take care of their employees. The work environment should be safe. Saving and planning for the future is important. Higher education and more education leads to a better job. The more experienced you are, the more money you should make. The longer you work for a company, the more money you should make. The government should regulate organizations and individuals. Individuals should take responsibility for their mistakes. Products and work should be high quality. Managers should be respected. Professionals should be respected. Employees should keep learning and improving. Work time and leisure time should be balanced. The most qualified person should be hired for the job. The values and ideas that I've just listed may not be true for the particular workplace or professional culture that you're looking at. However, hopefully you now have an understanding of the wide variety of values and ideas that drive our workplace and professional cultures. If we just teach our students the products and behaviors of a workplace or professional culture and not also the values and ideas, we are unfortunately giving them an incomplete picture of that workplace or professional culture. Our next step in this process then is to link all three of these layers together. We need to link the values and ideas with the behaviors, with the products, so that our students can understand how all of these are interconnected to create that final workplace or professional culture. The values and ideas of a culture are at the core of an onion for a really good reason. Those values and ideas drive everything else that happens in the culture. So ideas and values are the base. On top of that, we then layer the behaviors, and on top of that, we layer the products. Let's take a look at what this looks like in particular workplaces. We'll start with a trades workplace. An idea that's very core to every trades workplace is that safety is important. The behaviors that we then see are things like people following safety rules and staff and employees being trained in those safety rules. On top of that, we put the products. Products we see with respect to safety include hard hats, safety boots, warning signs, and so on. Here's another example that applies to pretty much any workplace or professional culture. The idea or value is that hard work and ability should be rewarded. The behavior that we then see is a regular evaluation of people's performance. And on top of that, the products we see are things like performance reviews, bonuses, and some type of reward system. It's time for you to do some work again. What I'd like you to do is take a look at your particular workplace or professional culture. Pick one or two of the ideas that you've identified from that culture and figure out what are the behaviors that are associated with those ideas, and then what are the products that are associated with those ideas. This will enable you to draw those connections for your students as you teach your language course. these layers of culture that we've looked at, the values or ideas in the middle, then the behaviors, and then the products, has implications for the language that you're going to put into your course. Your students need to both know and use the language associated with each of these layers. You need to ask and answer 3 important questions as you're designing your course. What language do your students need in order to use the products of that particular culture? What language do your students need in order to follow the behaviors of the culture? And finally, what language do your students need in order to understand the values and ideas of the culture? As you know, language is enormous. Your challenge when you're putting your course together is to take this enormous amount of language that you could possibly teach your students and figure out what's crucial for their communication in their particular workplace culture. Research has shown that there are 4 key areas of language to focus on when it comes to workplace or professional communication. The first of these is vocabulary or terminology that is very specific to that particular context. The second of these is language structures or grammar. The third is what we call formulaic language. These are set phrases that are very commonly used in that particular workplace or profession. And finally, we have discourse patterns, the way that people put sentences together in that particular workplace or profession. In order to finalize the language content for your course, you need to put the culture pieces together with those 4 language areas. Take a look on your handout in section number 4 and you'll see a diagram that illustrates what this looks like. Let's take a look at an example. We'll go back to our safety issue. Remember that our value was safety is important, our behavior was people follow safety rules and people get trained in following those safety rules, and our products are things like hard hats and safety boots. What is the vocabulary that goes with these 3 layers of culture? You would want to teach your students words like hazardous, flammable, poisonous, and dangerous, for example. What are the language structures or grammar targets that go with these 3 layers of culture? You would want to teach your students imperatives so that they can give orders in urgent situations like don't do that or close the door or stop doing that. And you would also want your students to know modals of necessity. You must do this, you should do this, and so on. What are some of the formulaic phrases that your students would need to know? They might need to know a phrase such as in the event of. So in the event of an emergency, do this. They might need to know call 911. They might need to know what are the symptoms. The symptoms are so on and so forth. So those are examples of some formulaic language that you would want to teach your students. Finally, there's discourse that goes with all of these safety issues. For example, you would want to teach your students the order in which to conduct an emergency telephone call to 911. You would need to teach them to start off with, my name is, I am at, and then a description of the situation. So that's some of the discourse that needs to be taught here. Let's take a look at one more example. Our value is that hard work and ability should be rewarded. Our behavior is evaluating staff performance. And our products are things like performance reviews, bonuses, and rewards. You need to teach your students vocabulary like positive feedback, constructive feedback, performance review, and then some of the words they might find on a performance review such as satisfactory, meets expectations, and exceeds expectations. In terms of language structures, you need to teach your students modals of ability, necessity, and advice, because these go with performance reviews. And you also need to make sure your students know simple past and present perfect, because these are used to describe past performance. Some of the formulaic language that you would need to teach your students include phrases such as, you need to work on such and such, you need to improve such and such, and I would like to see more of such and such. The discourse pattern that we see with this particular piece of culture is called the feedback sandwich. The first layer of the sandwich is positive feedback. The middle piece of the sandwich is the negative or constructive feedback. And finally, the bottom piece of the sandwich is another piece of positive feedback. So that's a key discourse pattern for performance appraisals. I have one last job for you. Select one aspect of the workplace or professional culture that you've looked at so far. On one side of your page, write down one of the ideas and then the behaviors and products that go with that idea. On the other side of the page, write down the vocabulary, language structures, formulaic language, and discourse patterns that students need to know for that particular aspect of the culture. In order to build a complete course for your workplace or profession, repeat the process that you just finished many more times. Select the areas of culture that you want to focus on, and then determine the language that is associated with each of those areas of culture. By conducting this systematic and methodical analysis of the workplace or professional culture and the associated language, you can ensure that your students will have all of the language and communication skills that they need in order to be successful.